o'clock. I'm sure Revere TV would appreciate it if we were on time here. So I imagine that we'll have a lot more people joining us in a few minutes, but I'm going to get this show started. To do so, I'm going to share my screen. And first, just want to introduce the staff who've been involved in the Redrawing Revere Town Hall, and then we'll go through the agenda after that. So my name is Ruben Cantor. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for the city, and helping lead this effort due to all the sort of the data and technology needs of the process. And maybe in the order of the staff that's listed here, folks can introduce themselves.
Diane Kolover, Elections Commissioner, just providing previous best practices.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dimple Rana. I'm the Director of Community Health and Engagement.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie McLaughlin, and I do communications in the mayor's office.
Good evening. I'm Kate Cook. I practice election law at Sugarman Rogers.
Hello, James Clue. I'm a GIS specialist who's worked with the city for about 10 years now. I helped make the maps.
And I don't think we'd be able to hear her if she introduced herself, but doing the Spanish interpretation is Milena Cuadra-Sayas. I hope I said that correctly. We really appreciate her being here. Everything that you'll see here on this presentation, as well as many other things, are at the website, www.revere.org/redrawingrevere, which I think you probably mostly saw since you got to this Zoom. So going over the agenda, we're going to review the process, the redrawing process, and how that is going to work. We're going to do some census data update since we had the census data that came to us last month. We are going to go over the draft ward maps that James very generously spent time on and put together, along with an intern from UMass Boston, Yvonne Vu. And then really the bulk of this meeting and the main reason we're doing this is to hear from you. So I don't know if every one of the folks of the panelists here can do more than 30 to 45 minutes, but I want to make sure everyone gets heard. So we'll make sure to keep going until everyone has a chance to say something. So I know that I have a tendency to speak fast, especially when I'm going over slides. So I would definitely urge the panelists to let me know if I need to slow down, because really my goal is to get to the public testimony part. And so hopefully I don't whiz too fast through the data in that portion, but you'll let me know if I do. And feel free to jump in anywhere along the way if I miss something or if you have something to add to the process. So to begin with, why are we redrawing Revere? It is US law that every 10 years after the census data comes, every city and town is required to review its precincts and wards and make sure that they meet the legal requirements of the difference in population between each ward, as well as any of a number of other considerations that may be taken, brought to bear by cities and towns. And so for us, we have four primary goals in the redrawing of the boundaries. One is we wanted to make sure that we continue to balance the population numbers across each ward and each precinct. We want to ensure that communities of interest are neither packed or fragmented. Now, communities of interest is a very broad kind of a legal term that the U.S. Census uses, and it can be anything from a group, a racial or ethnic group. It can be people who have similar interests around education in schools, or housing, or jobs. It can be a very broad group, and you can, any group of individuals can sort of write up and make an argument as to what they believe their community of interest are. And by packed or fragmented, we did a bit of a demonstration of this back in our May 17th presentation. But the short version is, we don't want to take all of any community of interest and put it into one voting district and make sure that that's the only place they have power and no power anywhere else, nor do we want to fragment those groups so broadly that they have no power anywhere because they've been dispersed in some very geographically illogical way. So those are things that we need to legally consider as we do this, and that is a goal in our considerations here. We certainly wanted to provide geographic consistency and logic in how we approach these maps. And I put this last, but I don't think it is least. I think it is really important that we are listening to the resident feedback about the maps that we're providing today and over the next number of weeks. As of today, the deadline for providing maps to the state is October 30th. And so you're going to see a timeline that sort of works to that October 30th date for right now. However, we have brand new information just this week. We know the state legislature has been talking about a bill changing all of the dates at the last minute for the ward and precinct process. We now believe that this might go forward. So that would change our deadline from October 30th to December 15th. And that really doesn't have a big change in our process. It just changes the length of time we have to accomplish that process. So going through the existing calendar based on the October 30th deadline, last month, we received new census data. This was kind of the thing we've been waiting for months. Usually the data comes from the census in March. So this was a long wait, due to COVID and all that had, all the impacts everywhere that had. And so over the last month, we spent time putting together some of the census data that we'll be able to share later in this presentation. And out of that, draft a series of maps that we published last week on the website that you found the Zoom link on, and then leading right up to today's Redrawing Revere Town Hall. Tomorrow and over the next week at least, perhaps longer, depending on what happens with the state, we're going to take all the maps we've made a poster of all the maps, and we were going to post them down on the main floor of City Hall outside the election department, and ask people to review them up close and in person if they were unable to make this particular town hall, so that we can continue to get feedback from the public about what they think of the maps that we've drawn, and we'll provide the mechanisms to provide that feedback all the way up until October 1st. And then about a week later, we will submit one or more of those maps with precinct data. So let me just take a step back. What you're seeing today is ward maps only. We wanted to really focus initially on wards. And then after that, once we got our wards figured out, then get into the details of the precincts after that. And so for this October 7th deadline, we would be drawing up the precincts, again, posting them around City Hall, and then ultimately scheduling 2 publicly noticed meetings for the city council and the public to have the ability to discuss and provide testimony and feedback, so that we can get to what we hope will be a final map that we would propose to the city council, which we would legally have to do by October 19th, so that they would be able to discuss and vote and pass it, we hope, October 25th. And again, this process is not going to change, just the deadlines, the dates will probably, we hope, get moved back a little. We'll have a little bit more leeway to get to the final maps pending the state legislature. So what I want to share with you next is a little bit of the census data. And panelists, am I doing all right? Anyone have anything they want to jump in on so far? All right. So a lot has changed in Revere in the last 10 years since the 2010 census and leading up to the 2020 census. So I think probably anyone on this call knows by now that we've had a significant jump in population, 20% growth, more than 10,000 people, highest growth of any municipality in Massachusetts. And so I want people to just keep that number, 10,364 residents, in mind. That's the average ward size. So everything we're doing sort of going forward with all these maps is thinking about that 10,364 and making sure that we're within a certain deviation of that number. And I think it's worth noting at this moment that while a lot of this 10,000 population growth certainly is actual growth in the city, I think also a lot of it is that, a lot of really hard and detailed work was done in the U.S. Census process here in Revere to try to find people who hadn't previously been counted. And I think that's a huge credit to Dimple Rana and the whole team, the whole U.S. Census team that really led that effort. So I mentioned that 10,000 364 number, you can see these are the population numbers for each of the wards and how each one of them grew. So every single ward in the city has grown. The smallest growth was 11.9% in Ward 6. The largest growth was 31.2% in Ward 2. And so everyone is, we're trying to get everyone to this boundary here, just slightly above the 10,000 number. And so you can see because of this, Wards 2 and 3 probably have to come down a little bit, and Wards 1 and 6 have to increase in size so they can reach that 10,364 number. And just while this particular slide doesn't have a big impact on exactly how we draw the boundaries, I just thought it was worth noting that, again, there's an increase in unit count in every ward in the city. 54% increase in Ward 2, 11% increase in Wards 4 and 6. There was a reduction in vacant units compared to 10 years ago. That, the census in 2010 was right in the middle of the economic collapse. So perhaps there was a sort of an inflated number of vacant units at that particular moment. But you can see that has also been one of the changes since that data, since 2010. So I'm sure a lot of people are particularly interested in the changes in the race and ethnic breakdowns of the city. So this slide is showing that from 2010 to 2020, we had a reduction of nearly 4,000 people who are white, not Hispanic, an increase of more than 12,000 people who are Hispanic, Latino, and then smaller reductions among Black, African American, and Asian populations. So the number of the multiracial population from 887 to 3,000, this is actually a national trend where more people have been self-identifying across the country as multiracial. And so, it's hard to know exactly how Revere compares to where, to that change elsewhere, but it is certainly notable that that's a big change. And then I also wanted to note that the other race, non-Hispanic, one of the things the census doesn't ask is about people of Middle Eastern descent. And so we know that there are a fair number of people who self-identify as other or non-Hispanic. I think people also would select other groups as well. So it could be any of a number of things, but unfortunately the census doesn't give us great data on that particular population. There are a couple of groups that are missing from this list. The American Indian, Alaskan Native alone category, as well as the Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander. And I left it off just because the numbers were so small for those populations that it didn't seem worth mentioning, but I just wanted to note that those populations are in the census data for counting purposes. So I also wanted to show the total population share. So we can see that the white population was 62% of the city in 2010, that's the light blue, and 45% of the population in 2020. We see the Hispanic Latino population went from 24% to 37%. Just noting that while the Asian alone population remained at 6%, the city as a whole increased by 20%, which also means that the Asian population would have increased by 20%. So I don't know if that logic makes sense, but because this is just the share, this is counting the share of the total population. In order to stay at 6%, they would have to increase by that amount in order to keep that same share. So hopefully that makes sense. And the last census slide I want to share is a lot of data. So I know that this is confusing and I'm not going to try to go over all of it. I'm just going to sort of hit some of the highlights. As you can see, each of the columns is a different ward, and the rows have sort of some of those same categories. So I'm just going to hit some of the things that I think are highlights to me. Again, we mentioned the 31% increase in Ward 2 and the 12% increase in Ward 6 is the smallest. Ward 2 is the only ward in the city that had an increase in white population and also had the lowest increase in Hispanic Latino population. Most of the other wards were 80, 90, and Ward 6, remarkably more than 100% increase, and more than doubling of the Hispanic Latino population in Ward 6. We can see the largest increase in the Black and African American population is in Wards 3 and 4. and the highest increases of the Asian population in wards 5 and 6. And similarly, the highest increase in multiracial population in wards 5 and 6. And the people who self-identify as other, by far the largest group of that was in Ward 4. So just because those are the data points that I find interesting doesn't mean that those are the data points that you find interesting. And certainly, I'd love to hear from you on what pieces of this are interesting to you. But I just wanted to hit those highlights so that we didn't try to read through all of these different data points. All right. So now I'm sure this is the moment you've been waiting for, well, except for the testimony part, probably. I wanted to jump into some of the maps. So before we do that, we have 6 different drafts. Many of you probably had a chance to see those drafts on the Redrawing Revere website. And each of the maps has some benefits and some possible downsides. We're not here to try to convince you about any one or set of these maps, but we will sort of mention some of the things that each of these maps are trying to do. And James in particular, since you are the drawer of the maps, feel free if I miss any points to jump in and let me know what I might have missed. And certainly the point of showing all these maps is so that we can hear from you. What do you like? What's working for you? That is ultimately why we're here. So I want to start with the current ward boundaries. Probably most of you have some sense of what the current ward boundaries are. So what I wanted to also do on this slide is we did get some people who commented on our website about some of the things they wanted to propose as possible changes. So I thought I would just pinpoint some of those changes here so that we can kind of at least take them into consideration as we look at the other maps. So I'll just do them in an order that makes sense to me. We had a comment that this section of Squire Road, north of Squire Road, really doesn't make sense in Ward 3. Ward 3 is the yellow ward, and they were proposing that this would make more sense in Ward 6 that has other north of Squire Road and North Revere sections to it. So Ward 6 is the green ward to the west. There was also a comment that this area around Roosevelt Street and other streets around that would be a much more logical configuration as part of Ward 5 rather than in Ward 3 because it just seems geographically inconsistent to have it as part of Ward 3. And I think this is sort of a corollary to that same comment. This part of Ward 5, people felt like, why is this section? A couple people mentioned that this section would make more sense in one of the more central parts of the city and not sort of snaked through from this Point of Pines area in Oak Island down into this section. So these are things that we thought about. We also had a comment, this is a little bit more difficult one to think about, but we were asked if this particular area of Ward 1, Precinct 3 might make more sense in a different ward because it seems so sort of disconnected from the rest of Ward 1. And this area over on the far west part of the city, so this little segment just west of Route 1 is currently in Ward 6 up here. And some thought that it would make a lot more sense if it would be in Ward 4. So that came up. And then the last thing I'll bring up is we had a comment asking why Oakwood Avenue was split. That's a little bit high, but why was Oakwood Avenue split, where the north part of Oakwood Avenue is Ward 6 and the south part of Oakwood Avenue was in Ward 4. And while we did think about that in some of our maps, I do think it's really worth noting that unfortunately, there's no easy way. There is no way whatsoever to build maps that don't ultimately divide streets because we do everything we can to use natural boundaries, train tracks and water bodies and like major roads like Broadway and other things like that to build these maps. But we can't draw lines through backyards. That's not legal. So ultimately, somewhere along the way, there are streets that are just going to have to be divided. And so while we try to minimize that and certainly appreciate your feedback, it is really not possible to avoid that altogether. So this is the current ward boundaries. And so I will take a look at some of our drafts. So this is draft 1. And we call this minimal geographic change within the 5% deviation. So the reason, so what our goal here for this map was to say, okay, let's take the existing maps as they currently are and do the bare minimum that we absolutely have to do to stay within the 5% deviation of that average. So 10,364 voters in average, plus or minus 5%. What's the bare minimum to get within that legal limit? And so the red boundaries on these maps are the proposed boundary for this particular ward. The black, so this little section, this black here and the black here, that is the current ward boundary. So basically, in this particular map, to stay within the barely legal minimum requirements of the Secretary of State and the federal government, we could move Ward 1 into this section of Ward 2 down here and make a little move here of Ward 6 into a small block of Ward 3, and we could hit that definition. And I'm sorry if I'm not getting into the weeds of every single street that's being impacted here. I'm happy to share that with you if that's of interest. So, and some of the issues, with this particular map is it carves up a little bit more of Shirley Ave. It maintains some of the odd geographical inconsistencies that we pointed out and that we had comments on in the last map. And it creates a discrepancy of nearly 1,000 residents between Ward 2 and Ward 6, which is a pretty substantial difference. So we basically took the same concept for draft number 2, only instead of setting the deviation at a 5% legal limit, we said, well, what if we aim for 2%, which is sort of a more ambitious, but I think a better way to keep each of the wards a similar size. And so you can see that we had we kept that same bite out of Ward 2 here. We also brought over a piece of, I think that's the Wonderland Market, cutting off a little bit of Kimball Ave down here to bring it into Ward 5. And then a little bit of a larger piece of Ward 6, of Ward 3 goes into Ward 6. And again, we're not advocating for this map. We're just noting, like, if we wanted to minimize the changes, but hit some basic benchmarks, these are some possible options. So we also did 2 maps that we phrased as geographic consistency. And by geographic consistency, our goal was, let's see if we can eliminate some of these kind of snaking boundaries that make less sense and that are really hard to explain, and see if we can create maps where communities feel like they're a little bit more together for voting purposes. And I think, James, correct me if I'm wrong, I think our goal in all of these was to be relatively close to the 2% benchmark rather than the 5%. Is that correct?
Yeah, every map past the first 2 maintained the 2% deviation.
Okay. So one of the things that the U.S. Census did that was really strange to us, but I mean, I guess it is what it is it took this whole section of the new developments along the beach and turned it into a single map block parcel with a large number of residents. So all of these maps are built with map block parcels that are often, 50, 100, 200 residents. And in this case, it was 1,800 residents in a single parcel that had to be kept together. So
Can I explain? So this might be a good reference to people, how these lines are being drawn in general. So we are provided by the census what they refer to as, quote, geographies, but they predefine geographic areas broken down. The smallest measure of that is what they call a census block. And a census block is defined in a couple of ways. It's basically an enclosed shape where all of the boundaries are either formed by roads or a physical natural feature that would enclose that space. So if you can imagine, a road with an area of housing that might have a river on one side, that could be a census block, or a literal rectangular shape with roads on each side would be a census block. But generally you hit these situations where some blocks might be small because there are only a small number of houses, and then you hit this area like around Wonderland where you basically have Ocean Ave, VFW Parkway, and I think that's North Shore Road, and then there's really no physical natural features that the census that the census might have been looking at. So you end up with a monstrous block, unfortunately. And now go back to what you were getting at with a huge number of people there.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. So yeah, in this particular map, what we did is we took that area with a large population because it's sort of consolidated, and moved that into Ward 5. And then because it was such a big block, it actually made Ward 2 too small. So we had to make up for it a little bit on the other side of Ward 2. But in
Ruben and James, we have a question asking us to remind folks the difference between the red line and the black line. Can you just remind us?
Absolutely. The red line is the current proposed boundary for this particular map. And the black line is the existing ward maps. So the existing ward boundaries, I should say. So in this case, you can see that the current Ward 5, it snakes along here down to this part, right? That is what Ward 5 does now. And in this particular proposed, and again, we're not saying that the city should do this. We just wanted to give a few different options for people to get to, that this was, that this is one of the options to look at in terms of geographic consistency. And we're going to have one other one that has another geographic consistency option to look at as well. In this case, Ward 2, we add in the trailer park, I believe, down here, and poke a little bit into Ward 3. So that's what this particular map does.
Ruben, I also just want to flag that Councillor Richard Serino he has his hand raised. I don't know if you wanted to.
Sure. I mean, I was going to try to do, if you give me 5 more minutes, I can finish with the maps, and then I'd be happy to, go back and review any of these. So, Councillor, if that's okay, I'm just going to run through the rest of the map stuff. And then if you want to go and revisit any one of them, I will be happy to do that. And hopefully that will be okay. So just looking at the second geographic consistency map. So in this case, a little different than the prior one, sorry. So you can see that we have a little bit more consistency with Ward 2. It looks a little bit more normal here and didn't sort of pop out in a couple of places. But I think the biggest change in this potential map is taking into consideration the feedback we got around this section north of Squire Road. We moved that into Ward 6. And then also taking into consideration the idea that this area here doesn't really make sense as part of Ward 6, and moving it into Ward 4 for geographic consistency. That was another thing that we did there. Another thing that you can kind of see that I like about this map that none of the other maps do is Broadway is actually a barrier for Ward 4. If you look at any of the other maps, all of them have parts of Ward 4 kind of protruding out a little bit across Broadway. So just another thing to think about, anything that we can do to create that natural boundary that is more logical for people, we think is probably a plus. All right. So one of the options we wanted to look at, because of the dramatic changes in population, we asked the question, what if we wanted to create one ward that was a majority or even a supermajority of Hispanic Latino voters? And in this case, I believe that Ward 2, we got by doing this little manipulation, we were able to get it up to 55% Latino population, if that was something that was interest. At the same time, it kind of took into consideration the comment that this section over here, Ward 1, Precinct 3, was not logically connected to the rest of Ward 1, Beachmont area. This did that, but I think it does it in some ways where we maintain this sort of snake toward 5. We snake Ward 1 up to that area with the apartment buildings along the beach. There's just maybe a little bit too much snaking for us on this one, but it does hit that goal if that was a goal that some folks in the city wanted to look at. All right, the last map I'm going to show you is the Secretary of State's proposal. Now, I don't know, we don't know if the Secretary of State had individuals who were working diligently and looking at this map for this proposal, or if a computer just took the existing words and generated some adjustments to hit some basic benchmarks. We're not really sure exactly how they put this together. I think that, it looks to me like this map sort of keeps some of the geographic inconsistencies, maybe even expands upon them by sort of protruding a little further in some places. But it's just another map that we wanted to share because the Secretary of State's office did take the time to provide it for us, and we want to make sure people have a chance to see it. All right, that is all I have to say about the maps for right now, except of course we'll go back to them with any of your questions. So we're going to begin the public testimony and feedback. So let me just set a couple of things real quick. For the format of this town hall, if you wish to speak, much as Councilor Serino has done, we would definitely urge you to raise your hand. There's a raise hand button on the controls for the Zoom. So if you use that, we will call on you. We will call on elected officials first, and then everyone else in the order that we see them on our screens. We would definitely urge people to try to keep testimony to 2 minutes. I think there are a bunch of people on this Zoom. We have 35 participants. It's a lot of folks, and I'm sure many of you have things that you want to say. So we're going to try to get to everyone, but really urge people to try to keep their testimony brief. And if you have a lot more to say, we would urge you to provide written testimony, or just, you can call us and tell us what you think too. We will only call on each person one time, so we're not going to keep going back to people over and over again. And so what will happen is when we call on you, we will promote you into the main Zoom room. We will ask you to unmute, and you can interact, ask whatever your questions are, or make your comment as you see fit. And then when you're done, we'll put you back into the attendee area. When you come on, please introduce yourself and tell us either where you live or if there's an organization that you're here representing. And like I said, you'll be moved back to the attendee section. If you have a quick Q&A, we do have folks who are monitoring the Q&A, and we'll make sure to answer those along the way as well.
Ruben, just before we start, I just want to make sure I am promoted to co-host so that I can move people over.
Sorry about that. There you go. So quickly, just some ground rules. Hopefully we don't need these, but it's generally good to have some when you do a thing like this. So we want to hear from everyone. We value your views. We really do want to hear what you have to say. That's why we're doing this forum. Please be open and respectful, and we understand people are going to disagree. That's always going to happen. There's no reason we have to disrespect people and treat people with anything less than the highest level of respect and dignity along the way. If people go into aggressive speech or slander, that's just not going to be tolerated, and we'll give you a warning before removing you. And I just want to make sure people are aware that the topic of this conversation is ward boundaries. And if the testimony that you have is on something different from how we're going to set the boundaries of these wards, then again we'll give you a warning. And if you continue to want to talk about something different than the ward boundaries, then we'll put you back into the attendee area. So with that,
Anthony, Ward 3 candidate Anthony Cogliandro has a question.
Okay, and I see Councilor Serino's raised his hand again. So I'm going to jump with Councilor Serino first.
Okay.
And Councilor, if you want me, well, I'll just bring you back in. Why am I telling you what's going to happen? So where'd he go? Wait.
I'm here. Thank you. Thank you, Ruben.
Thank you.
Hi, Ruben. I want to thank you and your team for putting together these maps. They're really fascinating to watch, and I'm looking forward to seeing what people's thoughts are as we go into the testimony. I just had a question, and it's probably similar to that of what Mr. Cogliandro is going to be asking in a moment. In draft number 3 of the maps, I saw, I believe he, yes, would you mind?
Hang on, sorry.
No, that's okay. So as you're finding it right now, Newman Street is split between Ward 3 and Ward 6. and I have part of the street, and Councilor Guanasso has the other part. Now, potential Councilor Cogliandro, who also, he lives on Newman Street as well. So I believe in this version, Ward 6 is shifted a little eastward, and I think I pick up all of Newman Street. Is that correct? Because I can't zoom in fully, but I believe that's what it looks like.
Let me see if I can actually show you that. So give me a second and we can see what happens here. Let me stop sharing. And
So while you're looking, I can just basically ask the question. So if the maps take...
Is that what you're looking, is that what you're looking for right there?
Yes, correct. So yes, so essentially Newman Street would be totally moved into Ward 6.
Yeah, and
So-
with apologies to you and any other elected official, we didn't actually take all of your addresses and
No,
consider that.
No, and that's honestly, that's not even my concern or my question. My question is if the maps take effect at the state election of 2022, we're in the middle of a council cycle. So how would that work if you had myself from Ward 6 and Councilor Cogliandro in Ward 3, and he gets put in Ward 6 in 2022, in the middle of his term? Do the maps not take effect until later?
Diane, do you want to tackle that question?
Honestly, I'd have to check. I don't really know.
So my understanding just is that the maps would be good for the 2022 state election and the 2023 municipal election. So whatever happens with the existing, if someone was moved out of the district, they would still remain a counselor for that district. But then they would no longer
until the
following election. Right. And Kate, I don't know if you have anything more you want to add on that particular topic.
I think you're right, Ruben, and I think it's something that we actually haven't discussed as a group before, but that's an excellent point, Counselor. And Diane, did you have something to add?
No, I agree with you. We hadn't discussed it, right?
But you don't get displaced from your seat in the middle just because the border changes. But at the next election, then that would be a different thing.
Right, and that totally makes sense. And forgive me because obviously this is my first re-precincting, going through this process. So I'm asking a ton of questions about stuff like that. But I appreciate you guys, your work on this, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from the public.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can I just say we have never had that happen, and this is my third re-precincting, and I'm sorry. We've never had that question come up, and I do apologize, and no one has ever been misplaced or displaced out of their ward or precinct, out of their ward.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I see Councillor Keefe. Jackie, Can you promote Councillor Keefe? And are people able to hear me okay? I got one comment that people said that I'm hard to hear, but people hearing me all right?
We can hear you fine.
Great. Thanks. Okay. Thank you.
Good evening. How you doing?
Good. How are you, Councillor?
Very good. Thank you. I was going to have the similar question that Ricky had, Councilor Serino. Obviously, this being like Councilor Serino, my first go through with the redistricting and living more in the center or somewhat not close to the boundary. I didn't think that there'd be much worry for being displaced. However, I was curious. You've done a really nice job, and I think that the levels of detail that you've put in has been really great, your team. So I applaud you for that. I've always talked about some of the geographic issues that come along. Like Councilor Serino and I split like such a small section of wards of Oakwood and of course Washington Ave. And then even Ward 4 cuts in across Broadway kind of haphazardly along behind Rite Aid. But will there be an opportunity, and again, I'm not looking to create extra work, will there be an opportunity to have a little bit of input on some of these if they, if it doesn't affect the percentages by much, if it's, 12 houses on one street or whatever it may be, do we have that ability to have that input?
That's what we're doing right here. I mean, 100%. I mean, we're doing this to get your feedback and to get everyone's feedback that is in attendance. And so, is the 5% is a hard number. We can't break 5%. The 2%, I think, is a benchmark that we have set internally. And if we have to go, a little bit over or under here and there because we're trying to make sure that some consistency makes sense. I think that, we are here to listen to the feedback and make sure, because you guys know your boundaries and your neighborhoods better than we could. And so that's what we're trying to do here, is make sure that we're listening.
Great. So I would imagine that we'll probably offline have a few suggestions. Again, I don't want to create extra work, but I think it's the OCD that kicks in when you see slivers of a block get pulled away and you just want to clean it up. But certainly great work, and I appreciate you all put this together. Thank you
so much, Counselor. Really appreciate that.
Ruben, you might have said this, but it might be worth just repeating the various ways that folks can provide us with public input.
Sure. Well, so we have anyone who's raised their hands here. We have 2 people who've raised their hands, and so
Anthony Cogliandro's been waiting.
Yep. So we welcome that. We have the website. If someone could put that website in the chat, we have both an English and a Spanish version of that site, which is. That's already in the chat. Awesome. Thank you so much, Dimple. So those you can give us feedback directly on there. Let us know which map you like. Put some comments. Tell us what you think your community of interest is. All those things are super useful for us. You can also email us. We are at reprecincting@revere.org. I know that's a mouthful, but reprecincting@revere.org is another way. And then, you can also reach us if you want to call 301 and put in a request with any one of us that you have questions of, and we can make sure that gets to that person and we get back to you as soon as possible. So I'm sure that you can see on the website ways that you can reach me or Diane or Jackie or Dimple, and we're happy to answer your questions. So awesome.
Would you like to introduce Anthony Cogliandro?
Yeah. Jackie.
Oh, Jackie?
There we go.
Okay.
Thank you, Dimple.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
We can. How you doing today, Anthony?
I'm good. Thank you guys so much for having me on here. You guys are doing an amazing job. This is not an easy task.
Thank you.
So Councilor Serino took one of my questions straight out of my head. So thank you, Councilor Serino, for that. My question is more from the procedural end of things. So this group is going to my understanding, this group will choose which map they feel is best. It will then go to the council, then to the I just want some clarification on the process behind the choices of which maps go forward, please.
Sure. Well, so, I mean, that's what this testimony is all about. We're trying to find out what people want. This is not about our choice. This is about, what the folks who are engaged in this process have to say to us. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from the current city councilors and other elected officials. We want to hear from the public. We want to take, I think there'll be advocates and other folks who are going to let us know. And I don't know if we're going to just submit one map. We might say, okay, well, we have enough difference of opinion on 2 different options that we'll submit more than one map for the city council to look at and review and give us their feedback on. And if the city council says, that ultimately for us to vote for this, we want to make some changes, and that's what we do to make sure that we have a map that meets our legal obligations, but also passes muster with the people who have to ultimately vote for it. So, I mean, that's kind of the gist of the process. I don't think we're not trying to put our thumb on the scale of any one right now. We're just trying to make sure that we have conversations around a bunch of different options and hear from the public and hear from you as to, which ones you prefer. And that's kind of where we're at. That's why we're going to post all these in terms of the process. These are going to be posted down at the around the election department on the first floor of City Hall. And we'll send out some messages and make sure people know that they're out there, and hope that folks will come by and take a look, or look at our website and let us know what they think to any of the many options we're trying to provide people to provide feedback.
Thank you very much. And I would like to state for the record that I would love for Newman Street on the odd side to stay in Ward 3. Thank you very much.
Fair enough.
Keith Fisher is waiting.
Yep. Jackie.
Oops. Hi guys, sorry about that. I think I raised my hand by accident, but I think you guys are doing a great job, that's for sure. It's a lot of work. but no question at the moment.
We have Nicole Silvestri, who is asking questions.
I was on mute. Yeah, go ahead and bring her in.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for taking my question. Ruben, just at the expense of time and not having my glasses on, which map has the most equal people of voting age across the board? Do you know by chance?
Off the top of my head, I don't know if I have that memorized. It's a great question. If you, we could just take a quick look at.
I can look later. I just didn't know if you had it.
If you look at the website, I'm just going to pop up the website real quick, and I'll show you what to look at that should answer your question. So
no, like I said, I did. I was looking at it. I was just trying to be lazy and see if you knew the answer.
You know what? It's just something I hadn't memorized. But you can see the voting age populations for each of the drafts here. So that'll give you a chance to get that number. But yeah, I'd have to look at it here. I don't want to waste your time trying to do something that we can do, but it's a good question. And I just haven't, I didn't have that number in my head.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
All right. All right. We are welcome. Oh, I see another hand is up, I think.
Oh, Claudia Correa.
Yep. Jackie.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, hello. Yeah, thank you for having me. Just a quick question and a reminder. Is this based, you're aiming for balance on the remapping based on active voters or number of residents?
So the legal requirement from the U.S. Census and from the state is to focus on the total number of residents. That is our legal obligation to hit benchmarks within the residents. We haven't, we have provided voting age population on the maps that you'll see, but that has not been our focus so far.
Okay. And my follow-up question to that, based on the fact that census are done every 10 years, and anticipating the number of the ones that are now kids, and that in 10 years there will be adults, is that data has been taken in consideration as well, or is that something that is not factual data looking into the remapping of the wards?
Well, the existing 6 proposals we did not spend time talking or thinking about that. But if there is an interest in doing so, if there was someone that felt like we needed to dig a little bit deeper on some of that, we certainly could find ways to do that.
All right, thank you so much.
If I may, there is somewhat of a limit to that. The census data strictly tells us whether someone is over 18 or under 18. So they will over time release more data to explain that, but unfortunately probably not within this re-precincting time frame. So we won't know who's going to become of legal age next year versus literally the year before the next re-precincting, unfortunately. So,
or even further afield, right? I mean, someone
correct,
could be 3 years old, and
correct, and not even be till the one after,
Exactly. So yeah, so that is a challenge that that we have with existing data. But that doesn't mean we can't at least try to estimate some of these things. But we are expecting that the U.S. Census is going to be releasing additional data in the coming weeks and months and maybe years. So far, the data that we've sort of spoken about so far is most of the data that we have.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Were there questions? I see there's some questions in the chat. Is the data?
There is a question in the chat, Ruben. Is the data for each map available for export?
Nikki, I love how you think. I don't have that plan at this moment. So if anyone on this call wants a spreadsheet of the data, I will do my best to see what I can provide. Oh, maybe it was. Nope, it was for all hosts and panelists. So yeah, Nikki, but I'm happy to share that. If that's something you want. Sorry about that. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns? I mean, what I also love to hear from people is, what are you thinking about? Even if you don't have a specific thought on a map that we've shown you, we want to know, what are your priorities as we take these 6 samples that we have and go forward with, some more complete maps. What are the things that you want us to be thinking about? Do you have a community of interest? Do you have a group that you feel should be brought together and kept together for voting purposes? I'm throwing questions out there, hoping that folks will contribute. And do any of the other panelists have things that are on their mind or things that they want to say that we've perhaps forgotten or missed so far?
I'm just a little surprised that more communities of interest haven't come forward, trying to keep their area together because there are so many communities of interest in the city of Revere. So I'm a little surprised at that.
Oh, I see a hand up. Jackie.
Oh, Bonnie Hoyt.
I feel completely called out for that, so I'm gonna share. I want to first thank everybody for this work you've put into gathering the data, getting the map. I don't have a question. I just want to offer a comment, which is as a longtime Revere resident, a Shirley Ave kid. I really like maps 3 and 4 because it really takes into account the changes that has happened in the last 10 years, removing the strip that is where Ocean Ave is. That portion, it really doesn't resonate to like what Shirley Ave is and has been in the last 10 years. We know that there has been a lot of development in the year, so it sort of takes into account what you're seeing, Ruben, around the increase in white population and decrease in the Hispanic population. The way the maps drawn 3 and 4 really recognizes that change in our community. I like that you are trying to not have too many lines that snake around. This really does keep our community whole. It's a transient community, but really rich in culture, a diverse culture. It's a working class community. So I really appreciate that preservation of our community as seen in maps 3 and 4. So that's my comment.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Is there anyone else that has thoughts? All right. Well, Look, this is not the end of the testimony. This is just the beginning, really. Like I said, all these maps will be available. They are currently available on the website. You can get them in the map form. So actually, I'll share my screen again so that everyone can see all of the options. So you can see on Redrawing Revere, we have all 6 of these maps here. This is where we ask if you want to vote. We have some people who have put comments on. If you want to see, so that detail that I showed Councilor Serino a little earlier around Newman Street, that was the downloaded map that I was able to share. So if you want to see more detail, you can scooch in and you can see a pretty good amount of detail this way. You can also see it on the download if that's how you prefer to see it. And again, all the PDFs are the ones that we're going to be publishing have already created posters for. So those posters are going to be published starting tomorrow. And depending on what happens with the legislature, they'll be up for at least a week, possibly more. And we will have little signs of all the maps on how you can continue to provide us feedback on what you like, what you don't like. Great comment from Anthony Cogliandro on a specific area that he would like to see staying in a specific ward. I mean, those things are certainly helpful for us to know. Unless anyone else wants to raise their hand right now, I don't think there's too much need for us to drag this out this evening. This has been, I think, really positive and really, just a really good conversation. And so I'm really grateful for all of you who attended, and hope that if you didn't have something that you said publicly, that you'll still share your thoughts with us in some other capacity. So with that, Councillor, thank you. Thanks to all of you panelists, and please stay engaged and continue talking with us.
Thank you, Ruben.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Good night.
Good night.